So if we wanted to use this one, can Jonathan stand there? You would just go live. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. 2 minutes, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Great. Hello and welcome to the OxChain Showcase. My name's Chris Speed. I've been the PI for this EPCIRC UKRI funded project for the last few years, and with a terrific team, we're here to present some of the activity we've been up to. Like I say, it was a 3-year project funded by UKRI, but particularly with the terrific team down at EPCIRC who lead the digital economy theme across many questions around what life is like in the digital economy. Now, OxChain was set up actually and it started in 2016, which if you think about it is before the big hype. You remember 2017, you even bought some Bitcoin and you saw it evaporate. And we started before that because we were very interested in how blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and the implications of smart contracts, and we'll get onto those later, began to impact on NGOs. We worked with Oxfam. They set many of the research challenges around what are the implications of blockchain for a large global charity. And along the way, we explored different ways it could have been operable within charity shops, tracing things, understanding the provenance, where things came from. But where we landed up was much more in terms of what the public, what you actually do with money when you enter a contract with a charity. And of course, Oxfam have had a tricky couple of years, and trust, which is a central question, and it remains a question of whether trust works richer, deeper, and better with blockchain. So they were curious about how it might impact upon smart donations. Now, along the way then, what we began to do is exploring as designers in Edinburgh, and you'll meet some of the team later, along with computer scientists down in Lancaster, and you'll meet Ludwig, who became the key software developer for a whole bunch of questions around what smart contracts do, and in the end, ended up developing the application that landed in the hands of people through Oxfam Australia as they use the technology. And then over in Northumbria, a great team of great HCI, human-computer interaction researchers, who began to watch what happens when and how and what these things mean to us. So I'm going to show you something in a minute, because when we started to work through these things early on, we quickly realized that blockchains are as abstract as all forms of digital technology, particularly data-driven technology, in which abstraction involving algorithms makes life incredibly hard to understand, particularly for the public. And by 2017, we really started to explore how those things might be manifest physically. And we did that with the things behind me. You can just see what we call seesaws. And each of these seesaws actually involves a smart contract. Now, smart contracts are essentially a relationship that allows us to use something called an escrow, a way of securing funds and locking it into a contract in the ledger. Again, this thing that underpins the blockchain. And it allows then code to distribute funds and disperse them according to certain codes, certain rules, if you like. And these things were very interesting to understand from a public perspective. So we'll come back to these particular seesaws, as we call them, behind us. You'll find out why I'm calling them seesaws in a minute. But for the minute, to get us underway, we're going to play a pre-recorded video that explains exactly what the seesaws do. And Jonathan is going to explain how he developed them.
The OxChain research project explores how charitable giving can be changed by using smart contracts and decentralized technology. Smart contracts are a digital technology, and we've made them physical to make them easier to explain in order for people to understand what it is possible for them to achieve using smart contracts to donate money. The result of this project is a set of smart donations which allow a user to donate money with a, if this happens, donate some money. There are 3 different types of smart contracts shown in the seismic seesaws that we've designed. The first of these smart contracts is called the RNLI lifeboat launcher. Each time a lifeboat is launched, it's reported by the RNLI to their Twitter feed out on a shout. That tweet triggers £1 to be donated and released from the larger pot of money. This means that a donor knows that every time a lifeboat is launched, £1 from their pot of money will be donated to the RNLI to support those launches. The second of these smart contracts is called the campaign supporter, and it allows a donor to support a campaign or support a petition. They put up a pot of money and it's held in escrow. And each time somebody tweets support of that petition using a hashtag or even an £1 is donated. We've used the hashtag OxChain, and each time somebody tweets that, £1 will be donated to support Oxfam. The third of these contracts is called the seismic seesaw. a donor puts in £1 into the seesaw and it's held in escrow for 1 minute. If during that minute there is any earthquake anywhere in the world, their donation is released to the Oxfam Emergency Response Fund. If there is no earthquake, then the money is donated to the General Fund. These earthquakes and the trigger for the contract are reported by the United States Geological Survey, who report and record every earthquake everywhere in the world. These three objects allow us as researchers to explain digital technology to people using physical artifacts. They take away the technology, which confuses people, or people worry that they can't understand. And it just relies on the, if this happens, this happens.
So you could see, we're beaming from InSpace, a gallery in design informatics in Edinburgh. And if anyone knows about what we do up here, it's particularly to try and break down some of these concepts of data-driven technology and make them easier to understand, particularly through experiences. So Jonathan, you developed these seesaws, and I think we're going to have a go with one. And once we've done that, we're going to encourage you to ask questions of what Jonathan's done here and what we think's happening. Now, as we progress through the whole session this afternoon, we're going to get more advanced. But let's use this time to ask some questions and find out what's going on. And do use your YouTube comments. We've got Jane monitoring those, as well as, of course, the Zoom chat and so on and so forth. But Jonathan, which one shall we go to first?
I think, Chris, we should go to the earthquake one first. It's the one which is least likely to work, of course. So this monitors any earthquake anywhere in the world. And if there is one during our 1 minute contract, then the money will be donated to the Oxfam Emergency Fund. If there's no earthquake, it will just go to the General Fund. And so, Chris, put £1 in.
You gotta love a live demo. Right, so I'll put the money in here and I'll initiate a smart contract.
And so you press the button to start the contract.
There we go.
And so whilst the contract is running, there's an API which is checking if there's any earthquake happening anywhere in the world. And if there is, the money will go to the right-hand side. And so really we're just waiting to find out if during this contract there is an earthquake. And so there has been an earthquake somewhere in the world, and Chris's money has gone towards the emergency fund.
It's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's
live demo. That never happens to Tim Cook, does it? But that's terrific. It's really fantastic. You get a small shiver down your spine when you understand. And actually, people who began to use the application in Oxfam Australia felt that suddenly these contracts, because of the relationship with, in this case, who are we asking proof of?
United States Geological Survey. But the interesting thing there is, do we rely on them to accurately report earthquakes? Often what happens with an earthquake is one gets reported, and then there are aftershocks which also get reported. So each of those aftershocks would actually trigger the contract. However, some of those get downgraded later and are taken off the earthquake register. And so I think this raises the kind of question, like, who do we rely on, and why do we rely on them to report such things?
So let's have a go at another one, because I think if you're dialing in for the UK, you'll be very fond of lifeboats and, of course, the RNLI. And you'll remember, or certainly I did through the 70s, growing up with these really elegant donation boxes with a lifeboat coming out of a station into the sea. And you would put a coin in and it would roll through. And to some extent, this is what you've done here, isn't it, Jonathan? We've got another contract.
So this contract lasts a little bit longer than 1 minute. We have it running over 4 hours currently. Now, the RNLI report every lifeboat that they launch in the UK, and they do this publicly through Twitter. So we're basically watching Out on a Shout, which is the RNLI reporting Twitter feed. And each time a lifeboat is launched, sometime after it is launched, they report it. In this case, we have a large pot of money, and that £1 will be donated every time a lifeboat is launched. We can add to that pot, so we can add some money in the top. but we're really relying on a lifeboat to be launched to actually trigger this contract. So whilst the rest of the event is going on, we might find that it starts to move and a lifeboat's been launched.
Now, there's a little screen on here, folks, and it's telling me that an RNLI lifeboat was launched from Crosshaven, Cork, and £1 was donated. So I guess that was an earlier event.
That was the earlier event, and so now if there's a new one, that will be updated, and you'll be able to sort of see and bring an awareness to when a lifeboat has been launched anywhere in the UK.
Now, shall we try the last one?
The last one, yeah. So the last one is triggered by Twitter. So you could imagine this as it could be a petition, it could be something that you care about. In this case, we're using the OxChain hashtag to try and trigger it. We have some money already loaded up, and we should be able to try and use Twitter to trigger it.
So if you're online now, perhaps you can take part in this. If you'd like to add #OxChain, we're using a capital O and a capital C. So OX, O, capital O, X, lowercase, capital C, HAIN. And we will find out whether any of the feeds are working today. Slightly nervous because we might have had people active already. But thank you for the demonstration. Let's have a little chat about what's going on here then. Now, the premise here was really to engage the public in understanding how smart contracts operate. And have you had any feedback about how they do? Does it demystify things?
I think technology is often quite off-putting for a lot of people, but really they are, in this case, a smart contract is quite simple. It is, if an event happens, do this. And by stripping away the technology and the blockchain behind it, you can kind of start to engage people in a slowly catch the monkey way. But I think it's an interesting starting point to a much broader context. And
as a designer, as a creative, I wonder whether you've come up with other ideas that you might have played with, because this is all very worthy, it's good, but I wonder, are there other instances in life you can see a smart contract working yourself?
I think there's something very interesting about a future vision where we kind of rely on contracts all the time. And so things like Fitbit, it's collecting data all of the time. Could we start to build contracts based on those types of things? What happens when contracts get taken to the extreme where you're addicted to the nature of running a contract and the excitement of does it come through and does it not come through? I think both of those questions are something really interesting.
I think so, and we're curious about whether smart contracts are going to become part of everyday life. We've already seen not just the wave of blockchain developers and therefore blockchain applications, which I think on balance have probably been hidden from us, the public interface, if you like. But we are seeing the fintech boom. So they might not be using blockchain. Nevertheless, they're starting to use automated code, if you like, to control certain transactions. And we've seen a whole bunch of new startup banks using those, along with data visualizations, to help the public understand a little bit more about their flow of money, but also the flow of data. So now what we're going to do is begin to think about what happened when these very material, physical devices began to turn into an application. So I'm going to run another pre-recorded piece here. And this is a small animation which has been developed to help us understand what we did when we took the seesaws and moved them into an app format. So let's pre-roll the video and we'll see if you can perhaps understand what we did when we moved from the physical into an iPhone application.
Smart Donations is a platform which uses blockchain technology to allow people to take personal charge of their charitable donations. Unlike with traditional giving, donors can specify precisely what cause and on what terms they would like to pledge support, like earthquake relief. Load up to £50. Set your conditions, the amount you want to give if your condition is met, and how long you'd like to pledge your funds. When you make a pledge, we keep your money safe by keeping it in a secure digital vault or escrow. Your money is committed, ready to go, but won't be released to the NGO until your conditions are met. Every time there is an earthquake that matches your conditions, your pledged funds will be automatically paid out. At the end of the pledge, any money left will be returned and you can choose what happens next. With Smart Donations, we aim to understand how data can transform charitable giving and how we can offer charities and NGOs new platforms for fundraising. To find out more about Smart Donations, visit our website at oxchain.uk.
So you can see quite clearly the evolution, the journey that we went on as we began to understand that smart donations became a way of beginning to understand how we might engage with a charity, a global charity. Now, it was with Oxfam Australia's help that Ludwig then developed a application. And I'm going to hand over to another piece of film now, which is Ludwig pre-recorded. And then he's going to explain exactly what he did and how it operates. Because when we move from the animation and the physical design, we have to get serious. And rolling out a blockchain technology across iOS and Android was never going to be easy. But let's listen to Ludwig. Now, when we finish the pre-record, Ludwig's going to join me on a live Zoom call and we can ask him some questions. So again, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Ludwig, get them ready and you can prepare those while you're watching this film.
My name is Ludwig Trotter. I'm a researcher at the School of Computing and Communications at Lancaster University. Within the OxChain project, I'm leading the development of our conditional giving platform and mobile app. OxChain is a UK-based research project in collaboration with Oxfam Australia that is exploring how data-driven technologies and blockchain can shape the future of giving. Most of the research within the blockchain space is still focused on the financial and tech industries. However, the features of blockchain technology, together with data or event-driven computing, offers a lot of new and compelling features to the charitable sector. They have the potential to mediate power and control, foster new forms of civic participation, and could help to increase the transparency and trust in charitable organizations. Through our collaboration with Oxfam Australia, we are exploring a novel, data-driven approach to giving built on blockchain technology, which we call Smart Donations. Smart Donations focus on the first mile of giving. It allows donors to attach rules to their donations, meaning their funds will only be paid out when their specific conditions have been met. Our platform works by creating a secure digital vault on the blockchain where donations can be pledged safely, along with the conditions that act as the key to unlock the funds. The conditions can relate to serious events like natural disasters, or be more playful, for example, based on the social media feed of a popular figure. Crucially, the donations are validated by an external data source that is trusted by both the donor and the NGO. We believe that Smart Donations offer a new and compelling way for donors to control and guide their charitable giving. Driven by measurable data, our model supports a large number of conditions, beneficiaries, and data sources, and can be easily adapted to a variety of fundraising campaigns, projects, and institutions. Instead of just measuring the impact of a donation, we offer a platform that makes charitable donations programmable, relating giving directly and immediately to real-world events. Since funds are pledged ahead and are released in real time, NGOs know exactly how much funding will be available, for example, in the moment an earthquake of magnitude 6.0 strikes on a Pacific island. This means NGOs can better plan ahead and targeted aid can be delivered much quicker. Working closely with Oxfam Australia, we have developed a reference implementation of the Smart Donation platform that runs on a private Ethereum blockchain. Using our mobile app for Android and iPhones, donors can create their personal account and load up funds using a voucher or credit card. Within the app, they can browse through a list of smart donations that comprise of a set of data providers and conditions grouped around a specific project or a campaign, for example, disaster relief or climate change. Once settled for a specific campaign, let's say the earthquake insurance, they can either select a predefined smart plan or use the Smart Donation Builder to create the personalized pledge. Setting conditions like the maximum amount they'd like to pledge, whether to give all at once or to split it across multiple events. And how long they would like to provide the funds for. By creating the donation, the donor and the charity sign a digital agreement that is automatically verified through the blockchain and can't be breached. Each time a condition is met, donors are notified and their funds are released immediately. The app allows donors to keep track of their pledges, showing them a summary and the specific details of their smart donation, the current balance, the beneficiary and the validator involved, and when funds have been issued and to whom. We thought to develop and test a range of content and possible uses of the app. Together with the fundraising and innovation teams of Oxfam Australia, we created a set of 5 smart donation campaigns with different causes, data sources, conditions, and temporalities. I already mentioned contracts around disaster aid earlier, and for us it was important to explore these from multiple angles. Our earthquake insurance allows donors to give based on the occurrence, intensity, and location of an earthquake, ensuring that affected communities have the support they need when they need it. The Cyclone Protector campaign, on the other hand, creates a link to disaster preparedness. Using the dynamic pledge control, donors can not only give if a cyclone makes landfall or endangers a population in a specific region, but already when it forms, allowing vulnerable communities to be better prepared. We also explored how we can use online conversations and social media to support new giving dynamics, and also link donations to online petition campaigns. Unlike the other 4 examples that were either located in distance or rather abstract in its nature, we also wanted to design a very simple and tangible smart donation, something that one can relate to or even measure themselves. Therefore, we added a smart donation around climate change that triggers if a higher record temperature was recorded in an Australian city of the donor's choice. Building on initial fieldwork and engagement activities with donors and NGOs, we ran the first real-world pilot of smart donations between October and December 2019. We have recruited a diverse yet really involved group of 86 participants with different age, background, motivations, and attitude towards charitable giving. We asked them to download the app on their Android or iPhone and to use it between 4 to 8 weeks. In order to use the app, we provided 20, respectively 30 Australian dollars in compensation, and participants were free to either spend these funds in the app, donate them directly to Oxfam, or to cash them out as a shopping voucher. We collected feedback through surveys before and after the pilot, and conducted phone interviews with 15 donors. Participants of our trial stated that the app produced highly novel and compelling experiences, yet the perception differed. While some envisioned smart donations as a longer-term investment platform, others enjoyed frequent engagements with even small donations. Our participants engaged with the app frequently and across daily rhythms, often during their commute to work, in the train, or in a bus. In fact, they used the app more during weekdays, with Monday being the most active day to configure new donations. Very often, participants engaged briefly in between other activities as they were notified when their condition have been met or have expired, which meant the money was returned. Participants valued an ongoing awareness of world events and a sense of immediacy of response and action it delivered. Contracts were signed with anticipation and excitement, but when they were triggered at unexpected moments, participants reflected on the why they were giving and if it was the right time and the right way to support causes they cared about. I think the most important lesson that we have learned as part of this pilot was that the delivered awareness extended beyond fundraising, fostering donors' empathy and a deeper understanding and reflection on how to support the causes that matter. While we trialed Smart Donations as a mobile application, there are many different ways to deliver event-driven or conditional giving to donors. We believe that the campaigns, conditions, and temporalities offered have a significant impact on the donor's perception and the success of a particular Smart Donation. Therefore, it is crucial for NGOs to be able to understand and manage the performance of the Smart Donations they offer. Likewise, it is important to provide means for donors to better judge the likelihood and estimate the frequency of their donations. Building on the success of the initial pilot, we aim to continue collaborating and engaging with international NGOs. Together with Oxfam Australia, we are currently preparing for a second longitudinal trial that will run for a minimum of 6 months, starting in the final quarter of 2020. If you want to learn more about Smart Donations, please visit our website at oxchain.uk.
So, again, I hope that made sense. We're working through this, taking you through the physical, into the digital, and into the apps. And I think Ludwig should be online to begin to turn this into a live conversation, both for you to ask questions, but also for me to start exploring some of the things, the challenges that he's found. Ludwig, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Hey, this is so strange, you know, somewhat pre-recorded, somewhat live, and yet somehow very, very live. Now, we've got questions coming in, so I'll give those a minute. But I just wanted to ask you a couple of things, actually. If you think that there is advantages for charities to consider Smart Donations as a route toward rethinking how the public engage with donating.
Yeah, I think one really good or big benefit, especially in disaster aid, is the proactive nature of Smart Donations. The fact that the funds are already pledged before the event actually happens, which allows them to not only prepare much better, but also save on costs. So it's a quite rational decision, probably, to use such a model, because if there is a disaster, they don't need to make public fundraising campaigns and invest a lot of money in advertising, but the funds are already there.
Terrific. I'm going to go straight to one from someone watching online. So Richard Bradley asks, from empirical measurements, how more likely are people to give when they can see their donations only being allocated when an event needs it versus regular giving mechanisms such as a standing order? And it's quite interesting, isn't it, Ludwig? Because to some extent, Richard gets at the habits that we have and how we might help people move to it. Do you know how more likely people are to give from the results of your first trial?
It's a very, very good question. And I'm afraid it's a question we can't comprehensively answer today. We had a very isolated trial over 2 months that was isolated in terms of timing, and also because we provided the funds. It's not as realistic as we would have wished. We do plan a second trial where we really want to where we want to gather the data by donors using their own money. From our qualitative research we had prior to this, we see that there is a specific audience for conditional giving that are usually having trust issues with charities that want to have a bit more control, that might be younger and not typical charity donators at the moment. So we don't say we replace giving as a whole, but we try to complement the existing models of giving.
Great stuff. Now, we know that the first trial went out in 2019, so about a year ago, I suppose. And I suppose we're going to explore whether many of the people who took part in the trial knew about blockchain, do you think? I mean, we don't really want to make this about the technology of blockchain, but I'm aware that maybe some people who took part were perhaps advanced users of blockchain. Do you think that was the case?
It was interesting to see that the participants were quite split evenly across. So there were definitely participants that particularly took part in this trial because of the blockchain nature. But there were a lot of people that were just very curious and were interested in a novel technology that was explored by Oxfam in particular. So I think that there has to be a discussion whether blockchain is necessary and the correct driver for smart donations. It could be. It has a lot of potential and advantages, like these secure escrows. But if people have enough trust in a particular charity, we can crop out the blockchain bit and focus more on the conditional giving nature. So there are kind of two research questions. And with our next trial, we step back a little bit from blockchain and try to really focus on the conditional nature. And then we go back with a potential third trial, where we then see how blockchain and the dynamics again help us to deliver smart, like a improved version with multiple stakeholders involved, like multiple charities.
Great. I mean, you could see, I suppose, in the three and a half years we've been doing this, that taking a charity on a journey and then taking their donors on a journey is very much what we call TRL 0 to 3. In other words, the technology readiness here is very much about trying to move things from the ivory tower into the hands of the public and understanding what works, what is appropriate and what isn't. We've got another question from a viewer, Paulina Weiss, who is, I think she's a student at Edinburgh. And thanks for joining us, Paulina. And she asks, why do we want to include this extra restriction and make aid dependent on personal lay judgments rather than export or local knowledge if it is already in the pot? So, and that's a hard question, because in some ways that does ask questions about where we trust and what we think is going on historically with donations. Why would we want to add that extra restriction, Ludwig?
So I think there are two sides to this question. One thing I really want to highlight is that we, as the OxChain consortium, approach the whole blockchain space or blockchain research a little bit different than other projects did. And we never said we want to disintermediate aid. And we really appreciate the expertise charities built up over, Oxfam over the last 80 years. And we really don't want to take that away. Why conditional giving is particularly strong is this decreasing trust in charities that we observed. That is quite a pressing issue on the sector at the moment, and it's allowing people that would not traditionally give to give. So again, we don't see it as a competition to traditional fundraising streams, and we don't see it as a competition to monthly lump sum giving, but we see it to extend it and to make it accessible to other people that wouldn't want to give, and making it a bit more flexible. And you could also explore that in institutional giving, where it becomes particularly strong if, let's say, government wants to give and wants to ensure their funds are provided for a particular duration, and then some populist government is elected, and they cut the funding for everything. So with smart donations, that wouldn't be possible, right? A charity could be certain that the funds that are pledged for, let's say, 5 years, stay there for the 5 years. And that's kind of, so it's not restrictions, it's more dynamics for the donor, but also more security for the charity, which is quite interesting, I think.
Good, thank you. I think it's interesting. I must admit, I think since we've been doing this, I don't know, we started some of these conversations in 2015, and I've always been acutely aware that trying to ideate the reason for using cryptography, perhaps cryptocurrencies, but certainly blockchains, is one which is hard to ask in the UK because we live in a trusted society. I tend to trust most of the number plates on the cards. I tend to trust the money. Despite the government, I tend to, in general, put trust inside local and national governments. Another question from our audience, though, is, Ludwig, are there certain types of data or events that are more useful to design smart contracts around than others in terms of frequency, scale, and perhaps promoting donor engagement? Because it does rely on the data streams which are trustworthy and appropriate. What do you think? Are there things that might be more appropriate than others?
Yes. So from the performance, we've seen extreme differences across the 5 contracts we offered. With the earthquake insurance actually be by far the best performing. It issued more than 90% of the funds over these 8 weeks, while others have been much less frequent. So linking it up to the campaign, for example, which didn't perform as expected, that actually had a really severe impact on the funds that were issued. So that's really interesting to see that the dynamics have to fit kind of into the donors' expectations, and we think it's important for charities to be able to estimate those. This is why we currently work on a dashboard and analytics using data science to really be able to predict how often such a donation would potentially be paid out, and also to display these informations to the donor. Because what we saw is that sometimes donors were a little bit disappointed if funds haven't been paid out, even though we explicitly had things in our design or in the app, so contracts that would trigger very rarely, just to see how donors would react to this. So that's definitely an ongoing research challenge that we are exploring, and we think we have quite interesting pathways to go there, but also good ideas how to tackle this.
Great, thanks. So before we go to, we've got one more question. I like a live TV show. Ella Tallinn asked, can you tell us about your participants' reactions to money being returned at the end of a smart contract? Did they want to pledge the money again? Would they want to choose different conditions? And of course, that moment when I put money into your escrow, what happens? It stays in a peculiar space. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think during the trial, because it was quite short and we limited the contracts to maximum 7 days, it was much less likely that they pay out. So we had them being returned quite frequently. The interesting thing is here that we had an overpledge rate of, I have to look it up in the contract and I have to say it later, but it was definitely overpledged nearly by factor 2. So donors really were engaging with the app, and once money was returned, they pledged it again. In the end of the trial, when we finished it, we gave donors the opportunity to either donate it to Oxfam or to cash it out as a shopping voucher. Here we only observed, we only had one participant that really wanted to take the money as a compensation and took it home, and the others were donating it, with the vast majority donating it to a cause that they thought fits best to their needs. So we had 58 that selected a particular cause, and around 30 that just donated it as unrestricted funds to Oxfam, which shows that there is kind of a interesting desire to steer donations, which kind of supports our argument for smart donations.
And another one from Ricky BC. And it's really about whether this transactional relationship is becoming perhaps too locked in. And he asked, do you worry that reducing giving to a transactional basis tied to specific conditions might detract from more generalized giving and possibly reduce funds available to charity organizations? So by locking us in, does that actually impede the ability to have unrestricted funds? And we all know that charities love unrestricted funds. The more strings we attach to money, surely that becomes a barrier. Any thoughts on that challenge, Ludwig?
Yes, so this is something we really addressed early in the design. And what we did is we created funding pots that are quite broad in its nature. So we with a smart donation, you decide when to give, but not what happens with the money. And that's kind of also a very big difference to all the other, a lot of the blockchain-based giving applications that are out there. We don't say what Oxfam has to do with the funds or a charity has to do. So if we steer it to a particular cause, and yes, it's more limited as with an unrestricted donation, but we say it's for disaster relief. It's not particularly tied to that particular earthquake. And the advantage of this, and I experienced this myself, is you have a really novel temporalities and experiences when you give. And I woke up one morning when a really strong earthquake hit Indonesia, and I saw the push notification of my BBC app. That was much later than the actual release of the funds to earthquake relief, and that was super strong and motivated me, even though I designed this interaction and built the app and I knew what to expect, right? And this is something donors reported. So there is a really close tie to what happens and what a charity does, and how the and the giving. And we think that is actually elevating giving rather than taking it away from other funding.
Interesting. Now, Jane behind the scenes is going to post in the OxChain report. So if you're on the social, have a look at that, and it'll be on the OxChain website, because in many ways, much of this, the findings through the first study are in that very report. So some of these questions. Now we'll do the last question, and then we're going to take a break. David Gunn asked, did the NGO, Oxfam Australia, consider this as cannibalizing existing donation streams or a new product line?
Definitely as a new product line. So this is what we had as a take-home message across the board. It's kind of a little bit like the Oxfam and RUT, right, where you also already steer donations by buying a gift. And again, it doesn't really restrict it to a goal. If the program is overpledged, they can use the funds for other things. And I guess we go in this parallel or in a similar stream. We had an interview with conduct a lot of interviews with domain experts, and one in particular, the social media expert of OxChain of Oxfam Australia, and he said what I already said before. He sees it for a very particular group of donors, to motivate them to engage with giving in a playful way, maybe even, and to kind of get access to them and allow storytelling, which smart donation should be very, very strong in.
Terrific. So we've got more questions, but actually we're going to take a break just for 5 minutes, because after the break we're going to ask the panelists, and the panelists do involve members of Oxfam Australia. So we're going to get down to some of those questions that I know have come in just in the last few minutes, and we're going to start using those to kick off the panel. Now, we'll come back after the break, and you won't see this Chris. You're going to see another Chris Elsden, who's been a researcher at Edinburgh. And he's going to be introducing the panel and the panel members and dive down. And then following that, I'm going to ask some questions and pick up some of the things that you're curious about. Thank you for joining us for the first part, and we'll see you after the break. Go and get a cup of tea.
Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Chris Ellett and I'm a researcher here in Design Informatics. And my role in the OxChain project has really been to try and understand the donors' experiences of giving conditionally in this way through an escrow and setting conditions around how and when they might give to charity, and thinking about the implications of that in the wider charity sector through working with charities like Oxfam Australia. We got some great questions in before the break there, and really this session now is a chance to try and continue that. So we've got a great panel coming up with 3 speakers who are really critical friends of the project, and trying to sort of unpick and dig a bit deeper and thinking, what does it mean for us to give in this way and what the implications might be for the wider charity sector? So on our panel today, we've got Josh Hallwright, who's humanitarian lead at Oxfam Australia, and we've got Rodri Davis, who works at the Charities Aid Foundation and also has a fantastic blog and podcast called Giving Thought, exploring new technological developments in philanthropy. And finally, Laura Quinn, who's a CEO of a local fintech startup, Sustainably. And we're going to be coming to each of them, having a bit of a panel discussion about the implications of these technologies. But do keep your questions coming in. And we're going to have a bit of discussion first, and then we'll come back to some of those questions. And we can ask them to the panel as well. And as I say, this is a research project, so it's really about us understanding and what does it mean for us to be doing these things. So I'll come to Josh Hallwright first. Thanks for joining us from midnight in Melbourne, Josh.
Thanks,
Josh, you've got a lot of experience of doing these kind of blockchain projects in the humanitarian sector. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about those and perhaps where you see smart donations and conditional giving sort of fitting into the mix there and what might make that something impactful.
Yeah, sure. We've been exploring blockchain for the last 3 or 4 years in a few different use cases, one of which is in a particular type of humanitarian programming, humanitarian support to communities called cash and voucher assistance. So in a crisis, instead of giving people goods, it's better to give people money or vouchers. And there's some trends towards digitizing that whole space. And so we've sort of gone down and tested and are starting to scale using blockchain technology as the underlying platform for that. And another one is using, with the Red Cross, blockchain technology as a digital identity platform, mainly starting around volunteer identity management and micro-credentialing. And that's based in Australia, and that's really interesting and brings up some really deep, perhaps somewhat controversial issues. And obviously the smart donations one, which has been, I think from Oxfam's side, a roaring success so far, and something we're really looking forward to scaling. So for us at Oxfam, we feel like there's a real need to really deeply engage with blockchain technology in a variety of different use cases and try and get to the nub of the issues, but also improve our programming and the impact that we have on people, as well as how we engage with the public.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really interesting with working with you guys on this is trying to find those specific use cases. I think we absolutely think, we're coming back to one of the questions earlier, that there's lots of cases where other forms of giving might be better or more relevant, and it's been really interesting to find those cases where it's meaningful to include some data about an event in the world, and that might change how a donor feels about the way that they connect with Oxfam or other charities. If I could come to you now, Rodri, again, you're a real sort of thought leader in this space. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about kind of maybe where you see smart donations fitting in the broader context of apps that are playing around with blockchain in the charity sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks very much for having me today. And hello to everyone that I can't see who's here. And apologies for the sun kind of shining into my face. Yeah, I mean, I guess I started thinking about the applications of blockchain and crypto to charity a good few years, sort of 5 or 6 years ago now, when there wasn't really that much going on. And I think over that time, I've seen a real kind of evolution where more people became interested, but I was still largely seeing that the use cases that they were focusing on were around donation transparency. And I guess a kind of quite often quite basic thesis that the main problem in charitable giving is a lack of trust in organizations, and that some form of radical transparency could overcome that, which has some basis, but I think can be a slightly problematic argument as well. And then for a period, there was a whole kind of slew of charitable ICOs where people were issuing tokens of one sort or another that was supposed to be purely for charitable giving, none of which, or very few of which, really kind of lasted the distance. And again, I think raised a whole host of questions about whether the possibility of doing something was being put before the use case. I think what I always found really interesting about this project, and particularly the focus on smart donations, is that one of the most interesting things about blockchain to me remains the idea that you can have programmable money or some sort of token that allows a transfer of value in a programmable way, and that can then be linked to various different types of external events, either ones that have a kind of causal relationship to the thing you're funding or don't. And I think it's interesting in the paper you've put together that there's been a mix of those two different things, and that people's reaction to them has been quite different. And I guess the final thing I'd say is I just think what I really like again about the project is that you've taken the time to actually think through the use case, develop it, pilot it, and then actually ask yourself some tough questions about whether you've found anything interesting in terms of something that genuinely requires blockchain, and also been willing to engage with some of the more challenging questions about people sort of asking whether this is necessary, or whether actually it kind of raises more questions than it answers. And I think that's been of huge value, and I found the report fascinating to read through.
Oh, thanks very much, Rodri. And yeah, that report's available on the OxChain website, and it gives you a sort of rundown of the sort of conceptualization behind smart donations, how it works, what we did during the trial, the kinds of contracts that you saw from Ludwig earlier, and some of our sort of initial findings about people's experience of them. So yeah, there's a whole lot more information in there, and I hope you get to it. If I can come to you now, Laurel, you're a CEO of a local fintech startup, Sustainably, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about what Sustainably does, and also just more broadly, some of the opportunities that you see in terms of fintech and philanthropy, and perhaps where smart donations might start to begin to touch on some of those.
Yeah, so we really founded Sustainably to serve a gap where we thought that it was just not simple enough to do something good as part of everyday life. So Sustainably takes the idea of, well, it's a fintech for good platform, but it really kind of leverages off automated payments and subscription services, things like Uber and so on, that kind of happen in the background when you're kind of going about your everyday life. So with Sustainably, you simply just connect your card to our platform, which is an app for end users. And then every time you shop on your card or connected device, we round up your spare change to the cause you care. And at the moment, we're supporting 40 different causes. And that enables people to have a little an impact just with their spare change as part of everyday life. But there's other ways we've incorporated doing it into the app. So you can see your impact and you can sort of track it all the time, and that the brands that you shop from and your employer will also be able to get involved in this kind of really simplistic way for them to increase the visibility and impact by hyper-localizing and personalizing their social responsibility at scale. So Sustainably is all about building that connection with you as an individual and the brands that you shop at and your employer to do good as part of everyday life. And I think, creating better solutions to solve some of these big problems that we have in the world is essential. It's happening in all industries, using data, obviously AI and so on, to kind of tackle some of these issues. And I think the sort of bigger solution is how can we actually leverage normal people as part of communities to solve some of those problems in kind of society and globally, and data is obviously a huge part of that. How do we harness that, and how do we leverage the people, the money and the data in the right ways to actually solve some of these challenges? So I think it's really interesting what's happening at OxChain, but also kind of there's lots of innovation projects and solutions in the market that are leveraging fintech and AI to solve some of the challenges.
I think it's really interesting the way that you talked about trying to leverage the things that we do every day and connecting those to giving to charity. And it reminds me of what Rodri was saying in terms of these being programmable. And I wonder if that's a question I could throw out to all of you. I don't know who want to come in first, in terms of, I guess, what maybe you see as some opportunities in particular for programmability, situations perhaps where donors you feel might be particularly interested in giving. I know we've tried out lots of different scenarios, from connecting a Fitbit to earthquake data to signing a petition, but I wondered if you had any thoughts as to the types of things that you think might particularly motivate or interest donors in connecting their charitable giving in a programmable way.
Shall I kind of go first on that one? Yeah, so I think relative to kind of what you're doing, for example, with Sustainably, you can remove plastics from the ocean when you shop, or you can help someone that may be homeless, you know, every time you shop. So it's kind of putting, making it frictionless and kind of putting it in front of the person at the right point in time when they're ready to receive that sort of messaging and then sign up for that type of activity. So it really comes to, I guess, understanding who it is you're targeting that is going to be amenable to that messaging, and then kind of getting that messaging in front of them in the most frictionless way so that they can interact, sign up and interact and actually feel really connected and engaged to what they're doing. So I guess there's so many different things that people care about. It's kind of trying to provide the simple way to do it and to kind of keep them engaged in that process, that they can actually make a difference. So for us, it's all about the behavioral science and kind of nudge behaviors and gamifying the product. So it is engaging, and it does keep people interested and engaged in what's going on, as well as showing the real bigger picture as to the impact that they're making as well.
Rodri, Josh, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it reminds me of the 40-hour famine that one of Oxfam's competitors, one of our colleagues, World Vision, uses to great success. It's built on the same idea as, you forego food and you effectively donate the cash that you'd be paying for food to support communities overseas. And I think that it's a really interesting point, Laurel, that there's so many different ways in which that can happen. We've seen the water bucket challenge and recently the hand washing challenge with COVID to try and pick up on that same sort of nudge behavior. But I think there's lots of different ways in which this can sort of trigger some of that engagement, which I think you touched on, which I think is really, really important here. Not only financial engagement, but the awareness and the continued engagement. One of the things we found at Oxfam is most of the public that engages with us only does so in one way. And this smart donations is a really clever, nice way to sort of personalize the ways in which you engage with Oxfam, depending on what is of interest to you. And you can do that in lots of different ways, not only with triggering smart donations, but triggering smart engagements. And I think that's something that we've certainly looked to continue exploring.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say I don't know if that answers the question directly of sort of specific use cases where you could apply this, but it certainly struck me in the write-up of the different kind of approaches you've taken in the pilot, that there were sort of positive and negative examples where you were trying to get people to set up smart contracts based on reacting sort of positively to things like crises and cyclones in order to directly address the cause. But then also those that sort of tapped into the more negative motivations, which are perfectly fine, I think, to use those. And I think we should look to use them more for charity. And I'm thinking there around the example with sort of statements from politicians, and then kind of using it as a way to kind of counteract your dislike of what somebody was saying publicly by giving to a cause that's sort of in opposition to them. And I think that's really interesting. I think the two sort of main reasons I think that this is really fascinating at the moment is, one, that the charity sector here in the UK and everywhere else around the world are facing enormous challenges, as a lot of the ways that they traditionally would have raised income have kind of disappeared, and they're having to deal with doing things in an online kind of digital way that they haven't before. So actually finding new avenues for tapping into different forms of online fundraising are kind of enormously important. And I think anything that adds to that toolbox is potentially very kind of valuable. I think the other thing with a view longer term is that I do think we're going to see a shift towards people giving through different interfaces and in different contexts. I'm thinking there of giving through things like conversational interfaces via Alexa and Siri and that kind of thing, but also through things like kind of augmented reality interfaces. And in those, I think one of the things that we're just starting to see the beginnings of now in the fundraising world is kind of context-specific fundraising. So people kind of reacting immediately on an emotional level to things that they've seen or heard, and then being given the opportunity to make a charitable donation that is specific to that context. Now, if that's not going to be just an entirely kind of random thing, or where their choices are going to be dictated for them, we need to find ways of balancing that sort of short-term immediate reaction with something that gives people the power to kind of choose what they're giving to longer term. And it strikes me that the kind of escrow model and the smart donation provides that, because you can kind of have one of these things in place, but then part of what triggers it could be a whole different range of kind of context-specific experiences. So I think it's kind of really interesting in terms of thinking through some of the future implications for giving as well.
Yeah, thanks very much. We'll come to some of your questions for the panel, so do keep those coming in a couple of minutes. Just to pick up on what you were saying there, Rodri, I think this engagement question is a really interesting one for us. And we found across our donors, we had 86 people involved in our trial, and we found quite a split between those who were really interested in the engagement and the awareness and being able to check their phone the second that an earthquake went off, or to recognize that the temperature had just triggered a donation for them. And they almost talked about this like a different news source sometimes. And we had other people who sort of said, I like just setting my priorities, and really in the future, I'd view this as a kind of investment type thing. And I would set aside, a few $100s a year and set some rules about it. And so we really saw two very different patterns of behavior in terms of people's both short-term kind of interest and playfulness with the app, and the sort of longer-term strategic thinking about how this would help a charity like Oxfam. Before we go to some sort of audience questions for the panel, I wanted to ask maybe a more critical question, I guess. What do you see for some of the challenges for smart donations? What do you think are some of the things that might be difficult, or that we should be aware of when we're trying to sort of use and implement technologies like this? I don't know who wants to go first on that.
I can give a double-barreled answer. I think just in terms of challenges, one of the challenges that always crops up with anything blockchain is around the identity management and privacy concerns and so forth. And I think that is both a challenge and an opportunity with smart donations in particular. As Rodri mentioned before, often what we see with blockchain-based giving with a lot of the charities is trying to increase the transparency of where your donations go, but it's a one-way transparency. And so if you consider Javier in Bolivia finding out everything about you when you donate money, that's a different question. And one of the things I like about smart donations is it addresses some of those challenges with the transparency of people's identity and the rights to privacy in a really interesting way. And I just wanted to throw out there as well, I think another sort of challenge opportunity dichotomy is around different types of donors. So at the moment, we've concentrated on the individual, but I think that there's massive opportunity and some significant challenges in breaking into the corporate and governmental spaces. So here in Australia, there's lots of conversation lately around superannuation or retirement funds, and the massive amounts of capital that they have at their disposal. Being able to take that more sort of social impact investment route to accessing masses of capital to achieve almost corporate ends in some ways. That charities are able to help address. For example, in my space, having anticipatory finance, so forecast-based financing, when you know that there's a cyclone on the way. That's if charities have a role, I think, of mitigating the impacts of the cyclone, and you throw in the corporate sector, and businesses have also an interest in mitigating the impacts of that cyclone on their supply chain in that particular area. And so being able to use the technology for those multiple stakeholders and triggering actions, I think is very exciting.
Yeah. Well, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's all for me that the big challenge will be building the ecosystem that can adapt to those challenges or respond to those challenges really quickly. So for me, it's all around the concept at the moment of thoughtful marketing. So how do you communicate and engage in a way that will entice or grow that community so that they will be ready to respond to those challenges. And I see there's kind of new awards around thoughtful marketing. It's kind of really interesting, a sort of, obviously the world is changing. It needs to change with all the sort of major global challenges that we have. And I think people are becoming more conscious of the impact that they have. So really thinking about how charities communicate what they're doing at scale to kind of get the backers essentially, or the people that can kind of use the technology is going to be a critical sort of challenge going forward.
And just to build on what's already been said, I think there's a couple of questions it raises in my mind for the longer term that are interesting. And one is always when you come up with a new approach to giving, particularly one based on technology, there's a broad question about whether it's genuinely enlarging the overall pie in terms of giving, or whether it's just cannibalizing giving that would have been done in another way. And if it is, then sort of why are we doing it? Does it genuinely add anything new or kind of bring additional value to the table? I think with particularly because it's such a kind of metrics-based approach in one way or another, it requires something to trigger the contract. Measurement and metrics are kind of baked into the model, and that is not necessarily unproblematic in that there's a question then about who determines what those metrics are on which payments are made. And also there's a kind of known problem with things like Goodhart's law where, all of the activity then kind of veers towards those things are measured. And if you're kind of measuring the wrong things, then that becomes problematic depending on how you set up the contract. I think linked to that there, not in any examples I think that you use, but I could see this being developed into use cases where the recipients were not organizations, they were individuals. And I think there, the question of sort of withholding payment based on criteria that individual didn't necessarily have any power over could become quite awkward because the power dynamics in that relationship are not necessarily great. And then I think the sort of fundamental question with this, I think is interesting and goes to a wider question in the sort of behavioral economics of pledges and how those are used in kind of charitable giving more broadly, is what happens when you increase the distance between the warm glow benefit that a donor gets from their gift and sort of feeling good about it, and the pain of payment that comes at the point where you actually have to stump up the money. Because it's sort of known in the world of pledges that if you ask people to make a pledge up front, then they get that warm glow. But if you leave it too long before you ask them to actually give the money, they're often quite resistant to it. And in this case, obviously, they can't necessarily resist it because it's automated, but they might still feel bad about it. So actually, what are we kind of doing psychologically by widening that distance?
Yeah, that's a really interesting, the timing is something, particularly from thinking about interaction design and what kinds of experiences donors have and how do we tell them a story of what's happening to their contract. So you might have seen in Ludwig's film earlier that, we put a lot of thought into how do we bring people along so they know where their money is when it's in this strange kind of limbo. And yeah, those are some really interesting challenges. And I think, speaking from a research point of view, that's what has made this such an interesting project, because it's always felt like a considerable opportunity, but at the same time, recognizing there's finding the right place for these types of things. What I want to do now is bring back in Chris Speed, and we're going to try and take some of your questions from the audience for the panel. And I think Ludwig's going to join us as well. So this is an opportunity. We've got about 15 or 20 minutes or so to take on some more questions. So over to you, Chris.
Oh, thanks. Hey, thanks, Rodri, Laurel, and Josh. Great to see you, albeit far away. But thanks for all your support today, but also across the period of the project. And asking these questions is central to a research project in which we're trying to find out these things, uncover them, find out where the bumps in the road are. But it's great. And well done for Laurel for doing this in the real world. I think it's hard. Yeah, Chris, we've got a few questions. One hung over from the last time, but I do like the idea that these questions offer us a chance to open up what we're talking about today. Richard Bradley asks, how might this type of giving be linked to tax incentives? If I pledge £100 now, then when can I offset this against income? Because of course time changes, and you're inventing the clock here with all your smart contracts. Only at the point when it is removed from escrow and provided to a charity.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I might ask Josh to come on in a moment. I think we're sort of, in a sense, redefining when that moment might be. I mean, you could imagine there might be ways of doing that in a way that's advantageous for donors, so that we encourages them to give more. But also, it's actually thinking again about there's various different ways in which you might actually structure where the money is being held. So we might have a blockchain which represents a token that you're buying when you're cashing into the app. But what would be happening to the money that you'd actually pledge? Would that be sitting physically locked in a bank account somewhere, or would it be guaranteed in some other way? I don't know if Josh, you have a comment on that. You might have a bit more experience there.
Not so much. I think that it does sort of bring into questions around sort of trust accounts and foundations based on trust. But I think maybe Rodri might be a better place to come in on this.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too far down in the weeds on charity tax, it makes me think of a sort of broader conversation I've been involved in for years around the different ways in which you can kind of structure intermediaries, and particularly sort of digital intermediaries around giving. And there are various different models, and it depends on things like whether the intermediary themselves has the required tax status as a charity, that the donation to the intermediary counts for tax purposes. So I could see an example where you set up a smart contract and it is held by an organization that itself is a charity. So say in the UK context, that would qualify for gift aid, and you could get the relief as a donor on that. I guess the intermediary themselves would have to kind of claim the gift aid and then either use it to fund its own costs or pass it on to the recipient charity at the end, and that would be up to the model that you tended to use. The main question in all of that, I think, and it's the same one you see with things like donor advised funds, is does the donor retain any sort of control over the money, or are they able to get the money back? And if the answer is no, which it should seem to be in most of these escrow cases, it should probably be fine. Although that being said, I wouldn't pretend that HMRC or Treasury are, anywhere near kind of actually allowing gift aid on an escrow donation held in a cryptocurrency wallet.
So interesting. We are actually challenged with this question at the moment for the second trial, and what you said about the ownership of the funds within the app of the donor, that's kind of the key question here. Is a donor able to cash the money out of the system or not? And if the answer is not, and this is how we do it for the next trial, we just say, well, if you cash in funds in the app, we count this as a charitable donation, and then you just steer the funds, but we don't return it to you as part of this trial to mitigate risks and a lot of questions around. So in that case, we will take the cash in already as the donation to the charity and work under the expectation that this will be tax claimable. We already had different ideation sessions how we could do this with blockchain, and one very simple solution would be vouchers sold in a charity shop. Right, you buy the voucher, and the voucher is a charitable donation to Oxfam, and you don't get the money back. If you get the money back, so if you are able to cash out funds that were pre-pledged, then the answer would be quite simple. It can only be after the funds were issued to the beneficiary. So it's kind of the point when you can't get the money back in a sense. And with the pledge in the escrow, as long as the condition is not fulfilled, the potential that you get the money back is all the time, right? The question is just, can you only use it within the ecosystem and repledge it, or can you cash it out?
Yeah. And there's a concept in charity law of the charitable threshold, which is a sort of one-way barrier past which money goes and can't return. And I think that seems to be the sort of crucial thing here.
Good. Thank you for the question and also the discussion around that as well. Another question that's come in, which deals with scaling, and I know Laurel's having to think about scaling from the individual. How do you think smart donations could scale from individual donors to foundations, trusts, grants, or government giving? So, Laurel, I don't know if you've got a thought on that, but as you move, and I use your app sustainably, and I feel like it's a one to my charity via my bank account using the open banking. But I know you're thinking about involving more people, thinking more of a Web 2.0, FinTech 2.0 approach. Is that appropriate?
Yeah. For us, we have got a corporate giving platform that we're building at the moment with our first major corporate. So it will enable them to give and causes their customers and employees care about. And for us, it's all about creating that interface that enables the brands to contribute easily to, and the individual to have control over who it is that the corporate is contributing to. So yeah, that I think is really a big thing for us, because it opens up a wider distribution. It enables people to see the brands that they care about or work for or shop at, giving instantly to the cause that they care about, rather than maybe one or two big things that they currently support. And we are sort of approach to that is that we believe that if we get people more engaged in kind of with their corporates, they will actually be more engaged in getting the corporate benefiting from the corporate matching that is available that currently is unclaimed. Because you tend to just get the people that are doing the ultra marathons or marathons kind of getting involved in corporate giving, rather than opening up to a broader spectrum. So by adding more ways to give and giving the end user control and visibility in their app, that's the kind of hypothesis that we're kind of building our B2B platform and our entire ecosystem.
Very good.
So yeah,
very clever. And again, thinking, and I wonder whether, Josh, you'd thought about, does any of these the research, this R&D or these experiments, ask questions about what you might be doing at HQ Oxfam? Does that change, or have you thought about those implications scaling up to other applications possibly?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that, as I mentioned before, that there's lots of different ways in which this can facilitate some more transformational change in the system. I think there was a comment earlier around, like, is this just a transactional thing and what are the risks associated? Whereas I think the platform enables not only different types of giving from different types of actors, and is sort of agnostic in the sense that it can take any of those, but also on the other side in terms of where the money goes and to whom it goes and how quickly. And so Oxfam for a long time now is trying to, before it was a commonly accepted term, disintermediate between the two. So the localization agenda and things like this, working a lot with local partners. So very much trying to reduce the role of headquarters, shift power to local organizations and local actors, but provide the services of a large global NGO in the sense of the registration, the legal risk, the compliance requirements, etc. And so it is starting to shrink that role. I think the other thing, and the important thing to say, is that there's two things that I think the value of larger NGOs in the headquarter countries can still play. One is sort of facilitating brokering expertise that may be available locally or in neighboring countries, but may not be. And two is taking decisions that are hard for local actors to take because it could be putting people in harm's way. And so being able to remove or be removed from those situations can be incredibly important.
Very interesting. Chris, I'm going to bring you back in and ask you a question from Richard Bradley, because I know you were involved in the trial and going through some of the findings. During the trial, was there any propensity for those participants who initially took the give and forget approach to become more frequently engaged with the giving process and the trigger causes?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think what was interesting was, first of all, we introduced a number of different contracts in the trial, and we introduced two of them halfway through as well. So we did see some participants get interested in those, and it was really trying to find something that made sense to an individual and their circumstances. I would say in general, people actually quite found their way quite quickly in terms of how much they want to engage with this app. It also sort of intersected with how people use their phones generally. We find people using this app on the commute before they went to bed. And it was actually, I think there was a lot of time for people trying to figure out where this fits in their routines, which is again, very different from seeing that you've given £10 a month to Oxfam in your bank slip. So we saw quite a lot of journeys. It would be hard to say that there were lots of people who suddenly got, it became much more engaged. And I think that really depends on a lot of how people consumed media and content in general. But yeah, so it was really trying to find those journeys that made sense to people. And I think that's a real challenge going forward is, you know, we did a lot of work with Oxfam Australia to try and figure out what causes have you got that you think could benefit from this? Or how could we talk about it in these ways? Finding the data that matches and then finding the story that makes sense for the donor. It's quite a lot to piece together. And one of the things I think we need to do going forward is figuring out what's the dashboard, what's the management system? How do we, if we were going to put this out in the world and you didn't have Ludwig and I, how would you be making sense of these kind of things? Yeah.
Yeah, terrific. Right. Sorry, is that you?
Sorry.
Go on.
Yeah, it's Josh here. Sorry, can I just jump in there, because I think it's a really interesting question. And I think it gets to the rub of the second trial that we're doing. So the first trial was very centered on the research questions and sort of drilling down on some fascinating and very important research questions. Whereas the second trial is, I think, much more geared towards sort of more pure fundraising in the sense of a lot less sophisticated perhaps in some ways, but and that's not any reflection on Chris or Ludwig, that's a reflection on Oxfam. And so it gets to Roger's point before about growing the pie. We are very much interested in testing this with people that are not so engaged with Oxfam, to see if those different ways of engaging and what the platform does to shift any of that holds true. We think it does. But we're trying to test with a different audience than what we did the first time.
Terrific. Thank you. And thanks, Josh, for making it possible. And let's hope we get to a second trial before Christmas. Fingers crossed. There's a lot going on in the world. So that's all we've got time for, folks. Thank you so much for the panel on Zoom. It's been terrific to get you involved. And Ludwig for spending your time preparing the material, but also then following up with questions. And Laurel for leading the way in fintech in Edinburgh. It certainly is inspiring to see how you're driving that through open banking. And Rodri, who's been there from the very beginning, actually watching mad scientists or designers do this kind of work. So thank you, folks. Well, that's all we've got time for. We've had some things happen. It's turned out there has been a lifeboat launched in the last hour. So I'm going to add another £1 to the donation. In the last hour, we had another RNLI lifeboat was launched from Dunbar. So let's put another coin in the slot and wish the RNLI folks as much best wishes as possible. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Chris. And the team who you can't see behind, all spatially and socially distanced in a wonderful way, including Jonathan. And thank you, everyone. And if you've got any questions, please use social media, use the website, the report is there, and we'll put this video recording onto that website very shortly indeed. Thank you for joining us.